Hi guys, my name is Tim Roswick, and today we're talking about choices. More specifically, we're going to talk about interesting choices and player choices, and how that can make your game better. So, when you think about a game, most people think about creating an experience that's fun. That's what most people across the board think a game is. Now, games don't necessarily have to be fun. I think they have to be entertaining, not necessarily fun. And I think there's a difference there. But how do you make a game fun? What do you do to actually make people engage in your game? And what are some things that you add in your game? Well, I've been going through a lot of my different games lately, and with Phylophobia being the latest one, this game is just so much bigger than all of my other games in scale, just by far. And recently I've started kind of playing through the levels, and I've been doing a lot of research and level design and all that stuff, and I was trying to figure out how can I make my game not feel like a generic platformer, because it's a 2D side-facing platform. I don't want to say it's side-scrolling because it doesn't actually scroll, but there are a lot of generic platformers like that. There's a lot of platformers out there that are like that, and I don't want it to feel like a generic game. Well, one, I have the shadow effect, which is interesting, but two, one of the things that I really tried to promote in the game design is interesting choices. And if your game is just like, okay, you start here and the door's here and you got to go from A to B, your entire game is about execution, right? Like you got to jump over the lava pits, you got to jump over the dudes, you got to watch out for the enemies. The whole game becomes about execution. And that can be fun, right? Like Super Meat Boy is all about execution. That's awesome. But how do you improve that experience and make it interesting for players for the longer term? Like if they're going to play through the whole campaign, or how do you make it interesting the second time or the third time or the fifth time they play through it? How do you add replayability to it? You know what I'm saying? So I started really thinking about this problem. And one of the things that I added was this little heart collectible. And so the way that I would design levels with the heart collectible in mind is that the level would be a certain difficulty, but then the heart collectible, if they wanted to get that heart collectible, the level would become harder. So in other words, I might put it way off to the side over a lava pit. I might put it up next to a spike in a really hard jump. I might hide it. Whatever the reasoning is, if you want to get that collectible in 100% the level's going to be harder for you. So one, you can stream through it, right? If you just want the core experience, you can skip it. But now you have a choice to make. Do you want to just complete the game? Do you just want to complete the level? Or do you want to actually 100% each level? Do you want to actually go get the collectible? A lot of people make this choice in the beginning. They're like, oh, okay, I'm going to get all the collectibles, or I'm not going to get all the collectibles. I see this with the testers. Some people make it on a level by level basis. They're like, oh, fuck that one. That one's too hard. Or no, I want to try and get that one. So I feel like that was an interesting choice. And as I was going through the levels, I was like, wow, like this is so simple, but it adds something really cool to the game. And I started looking at like all the different games that I play and what choices they promote. Like I talk about Halo a lot, but Halo was like the game that inspired me to start making games. And one of the really cool, interesting choices that Halo gives you is every time you find a weapon, you have 2 weapon slots. And you can either swap for that weapon or you can keep your current weapon. And then you've got ammo for each weapon, right? So like do you want that auto rifle or do you want that rocket launcher? But the rocket launcher's only got 2 rockets, but the auto rifle has 120 ammo. You're fighting the flood now. You gotta make trade-offs, right? Like you gotta think about your choices. And because of that, the game I think is so much better. That's one of the reasons, to be honest, why I think Halo 4 really fell flat for me, because the way that they set up the weapon system, where you kind of select your weapon in the beginning, was a lot different than the way that every other Halo game had made it. Like in multiplayer in Halo, both teams would start on opposite ends, and then there would be power weapons placed in the middle of the map, and then both teams would rush in and grab the power weapons. When Halo 4 started the loadout system, they removed that element of it. And I think that's one of the reasons why it was a really boring game for me. And I started to look around, and I started seeing these choices everywhere. Like all these great games that I played, they all promote interesting choices. Like that's what makes, I think it's like one of the core pillars of fun in game design. And so I started thinking about like, okay, how can I take this step further? Like I want to promote this stuff. I really want to try and make this interesting, and I want to do it. So I started doing stuff like, well, maybe there are multiple paths through levels now. You know, like maybe if you go one way, it's challenging, but it's one type of enemy. If you go another way, it's challenging, but it's a different type of enemy. Because I noticed in testing, there are levels where you have to jump over spikes and you have to do it in the right timing. There are levels where you have to like jump over cannon fire. I know some people just some people suck at timing. They just do, and I could see it from their video because they send me videos of them gameplay and they just suck at timing. So for people that suck at timing, like what if I gave them an alternate route to kind of go through the level? Because they might be really good at jumping over gaps, or they might be really good at avoiding other types of enemies. In fact, I see that there's usually a trade-off. It's not usually just person's bad at the game. They're usually good at one aspect of it, but maybe mediocre in the other aspect of it. So now you have a playstyle choice, right? If you have a level with multiple paths, now you got another playstyle choice. So you've got the collectible, you got the key, now you got a little bit of a playstyle choice in the design. What if I took it a step further and I started adding in, we were doing this on Twitch this week. We started off with these little things that we called artifacts, where they're basically, they're little hearts in the level that changes up something about the level. So we had one that was low gravity, we had one that was slow motion, we had one that gave you a double jump, and so on and so forth. And when you touch them, you pick them up and you can't drop them. The only way to drop them is to go find the key, and then you swap the key for it. And that really promoted choice, because now, one, I can design levels where you're forced to use them, right? So it completely changes up the level. But two, I can have levels with multiple versions of these in a single level, and they have to choose which one to use. I can have levels that, you know, persuade you to use one or the other. I can have levels where you know, using one might be bad for you. Or it could just completely change up playstyle, right? Like choose the one that you want to use. And the more stuff I add like this, the more I feel like it's really changing up gameplay, and it's really changing it for the game for the better, I think. And this is just in Phytophobia, but like there's so many places where this applies. And if you just think from the perspective of a player, like what interesting choices do I want them to face? What choice do I want them to have to make that not necessarily is good or bad, right? Because I think the mistake a lot of game developers, like let's take an RPG for example. We can use a RPG light like Destiny. But like any RPG that I've ever played where the gear has like a number stat on it, right? In the beginning, all you do is you just, oh, that's a higher number. I'm going to put that on. Oh, I got a helmet that's 120 instead of 100. Put it on. 140, put that on. 180, put that on. That's no fun, right? Because one is clearly always better than the other. 100 versus 120. 120 is always better on the armor rating or whatever, on the gun rating or whatever it is. You see what I'm saying? So that's not an interesting choice. That's an obvious choice. Like, why wouldn't you pick the better gear score? That's stupid. So it's a mistake a lot of games make, I think, especially RPGs, indie RPGs that I see. Just one score is inherently better. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a gear score, but I think there are ways to make the gear different and more interesting in choice. So what if the gear has individual perks? Like this one's 100, this one's 120. But what if this one increases your fire damage, this one increases your ice damage or something? You know, now you got a choice to make. Now it's interesting. What if there are negatives to it, right? Like what if this item reduces the amount you can carry, but it's really powerful gear? Or this item, you know, does whatever, but there's a negative aspect to it. That's how you create interesting choices. Choices where that don't always have a better outcome, right? like if it's just about a number, you're gonna keep getting the higher number. That's not interesting. But if there's a choice that they can make where it can be up to playstyle, it can be up to any number of things, where there's trade-offs, where players will argue about which one is better. That's when you know you've done it right. When people can't really pick a better one. And balancing all that is hard, right? Like, yeah, it's going to be a hell of a challenge. And I use an RPG example, but this applies to any game on the planet. There are always ways that you can add interesting choices to any type of game. You just got to think about it. You just got to look and try and see. I think you have to start somewhat from the design phase, at least early on in development, and figure out really what you want to do with choice and what kind of choices you want them to make, what kind of choices you don't want them to make, and so on and so forth. So I kind of told you a little bit about how I did it in my game. I'm going to be doing a lot more of this moving forward, because the more that I pay attention to this, the more I see, like, wow, this is a really good aspect to game design, and player choice is a big part of fun in games. So I hope you found it useful. If you did, please leave me a like and a comment down below. Have you created any interesting choices in your game? You ever played any games that had interesting choices? Leave those down below, because I love to read about them. But once again, I'm Tim Roswick, and I will see you again tomorrow.